Hi, everybody. Welcome. Today is April 10th, 2025. We've been doing this session for 5 years in a row, talking about how to set your fees. And this is a session that we call, it's a core topic for the IC topic chats. And it is one of our most popular sessions. In fact, I don't know how it's going to work on the Zoom side of things today. We had 183 registrations, which our previous record was 161. And here we are with 183. I don't think we're going to have 183 actually show up, but we might have that many views eventually on Facebook. I mean, on YouTube or one of those groups. Anyhow, I'm going to jump into the session today. When we're talking about setting fees, we're going to talk about the general idea of how to set your fees, but we're also going to talk about how to talk about your fees as well, which is a new kind of addition to this core topic. When people ask, when you first started, generally, when people first start asking, what are your fees? What do you cost? What are your charges? Oftentimes, this is how I feel. I don't know. And then after sitting and thinking about it, and I'm trying to respond to him by email or talk to him on the phone, I kind of feel like this. But really, what I want to say is, show me the money. And frankly, I think our friends, colleagues, our parents, and perhaps our clients think this is who we are on the other end of it, just kind of trying to get as much money as we possibly can. And well, maybe we are. The reasons we're having this session today is we need to have an understanding for our fees. We need to have some integrity when we ask for a contract. When somebody says, what do you cost? And you give them some number, you need to understand why you're saying that number and how you came up with it. You need to make your client feel comfortable that they're paying an appropriate amount, that there's value to that. We're going to talk a little bit about value today. Frankly, you need a fair compensation so that you can stay in business. And I mean this when I say this. One of the reasons I do these IC topic chats and I've continued to give back to the community is because I want everyone here to have successful businesses, because there's far too many, I call them posers, out there that really don't understand why they're doing evaluation consulting. They often are undercharging us, and I'd like to kind of move those people out of the business and have us take over, because good professional program evaluators ought to be the norm, and we ought to be out there. And when somebody goes to look, needs a program evaluator, they should know that we're out there. They find us before they find the posers, the people who shouldn't be doing program evaluation. Usually it's somebody who just has some basis of an understanding for research, and I'll give you $5,000 and they'll do it for a project that probably should be priced out at 15,000 or higher. We need to maintain our independence and maintain our reputations. So there's a lot of different types of fee arrangements. We're mostly going to be talking about hourly, daily rates, or fixed fees. And how do you come up with those? There's the term per diem. Per diem is a reference to what's your cost per a unit of time, usually an hour or a day. And then sometimes we'll say, well, I have a fixed fee for that. How do you come up with that fixed fee? Well, usually it's because you understand your hours, and then you multiply them times the amount of hours it'll take, your rate times the amount of hours you believe it's going to take, and you say, well, that'll cost you $30,000 for the year. And that becomes your fixed fee. All of that really depends on your ability to talk about your value. Now, a retainer is a wholly different thing. Somebody will say, hey, I'd like to give you $100,000 for the year. I know we're going to use you, but I just don't know where and how and yet. But we're not going to go into retainers today. It's a great situation. You can get it because it's nice for people to commit a certain budget amount to you, particularly when they don't know what they want to do with you, but you got to be careful. But we're not going to go into retainers. We're going to talk a little bit about value-based billing. So what is value-based billing? We're going to go back in and talk about this again, but the value, we're effectively thinking about this. Now think about this carpenter. Now you have a squeaky stair, and you call the carpenter, and the carpenter comes in and he presses on the stair here and there and that, and finds where the squeak is. He pulls out a nail and he hammers the nail into the stair, and the squeak disappears. And then he presents you with this bill. The nail costs you 25 cents. Knowing where to place the nail is $60. Effectively, the value of this carpenter coming to do this work was $60.25, because they knew where to place the nail and you didn't. That's the work that we do as program evaluators all the time, knowing how to do the program evaluation pieces that people have asked us to come in for. How do we come up with $60? Well, that's going to be part of the conversation today. To you, you've now gotten rid of a squeaky stair, and that value to you is $60.25. All right. The steps to calculating your fees are pretty simple, really. You identify the actual number of days you can work on billable activities. We're doing all this in a second, so I'm just giving you the big picture. You identify what your costs are. That's your compensation and all those other things that it costs to do your business, your overhead or indirect costs. Then you divide your costs by your billable days, right? All right, simple, 3 pieces. How many days can you work? What are your costs? Divide them. That's your cost per day, or divide it by 8. That's your cost per hour. All right, so we're going to go into the fee calculation spreadsheet, which I think is here. All right. I see a bunch of people in here, lots of geese and a capybara. Look at that. All right, so in this calculation, first of all, I want to just point out, we're not going to go into this. This is just good for you. If you're brand new to the consulting world and you're trying to figure out what it costs to just start up your business, this is something we developed, Laura Keene and I developed from the original literally paper handouts that were given to us back when we took this workshop back in the day. And we turned this into an Excel spreadsheet, which is now a shared file. So you can see all the different things that it might cost you. You're going to have registrations and licenses. You're going to have equipment. You're going to have marketing costs like business cards and logo designs and website, other kinds of things. So feel free to use this however you like. Oh, by the way, since this is a shared file, you can't edit it, but you can copy it and put it wherever you want. You're welcome to do that. One of the first things you're going to think about also is, what are your expenses? How much does it cost to do your business? This is your overhead. You're going to have other things. These are regular expenses that you do want to think about, okay? So you're going to estimate these things. You can ask around. You can post in the ICTIG community listserv, the message board that we have through AEA. Feel free to ask around about these things. You're going to have things like license renewals and legal fees to set up and maintain things. You're going to have accountants. You may need to do travel, particularly travel if you're going to go to AEA or you're going to do anything else. Accounting, I talked about accounting already. Bank charges, you need to put things away for retirement. Lots of insurance, whatever insurance you feel is necessary. We have a whole session on insurance, so I'm not going to go into that. But generally, you're going to have a general liability, and eventually you need professional liability, because somebody's going to say, I need you to have professional liability, and then you got to go figure that out. What are your marketing costs? Professional development. And of course, I don't know why I don't have it on here, but where's the software? Lots and lots of software we should have. We have lots of software for Zoom and for Qualtrics. We have software for Microsoft and Google and all the other things. So those are different expenses that you will calculate and you'll put in here. I have an estimated amount overall on another slide. Okay, back to the billable time. I'm going to just focus in on this example over here. And you'll see everything that's yellow is where you'll edit things. This is just our example. So everybody has, no matter who you are, you have 52 weeks in a year. That's just the way time works. 52 weeks times 5, because you should probably take 2 days off a week to do other things like spend time with family or go for a run or a bike ride if you're in Sacramento. You should only work 5 days a week, or estimate it that way. That's pretty common. So you have 260 days in a year to work. Don't work 260 days a year. Let's just start that way. So what are the ways that you can't work? Well, before we get into the business side of things, you probably should take some time off for vacation, for holidays, and sick time. How did I come up with these vacation hours? I didn't. I think it was something was given to me from Gail Barrington way back in the day. These are examples. You can play around with any of this that you want to. So you can say, I only want 3 weeks of vacation, and it'll calculate. I don't need sick time, whatever. It's all in there. This is for you to calculate. These are just examples for you. So feel free to do whatever you want. But after you take out those 7 weeks of time you can't work because you're doing personal things, you only have 45 weeks left. 45 times 5 is 225. At least that's the way the calculation shows on my screen. Now, what are the things that you have to do for your business where you will not get paid? Sorry, you can't get paid for all your time. Well, you shouldn't assume that you can anyway. Plus, you'll understand in a minute. This is why we calculate this in here, because there are things you need to do to just keep your business going. Right now, most of you are not getting paid to talk and listen to me today. So this would fit under professional development. You also do administration. That's the time where you're going to do invoices, or you're going to meet with your lawyer. You're going to do these different things. Then there's marketing, time where you're going to spend on LinkedIn, connecting with people. You're going to get on calls with people who are thinking about working with you and trying to set up a contract. So we are calculating, just for the purposes of an example, 12 weeks of administration, professional development, and marketing, where you are on the job, but you are not in a billable state. So that leaves you with 33 weeks where you can get billed. Now, you could disagree with me. You can come up with your own calculations, and I encourage you to. If you don't know how you do this, you should guess at it, because you won't have any basis. After a while, if you're tracking time, something that Jessica Metcalf and I do a presentation in the fall on, you can go back and look at how much time you actually spent on administration, professional development, and marketing. And perhaps you also should be calculating your tracking your time for everything else, like vacation or sick time. For us, we have PTO, so that's vacation plus sick time, that's paid time off. And then there are holidays like Memorial Days and other things like that. So that brings us to the calculation of 33 weeks or 165 days. That's the amount of days that you can work on client work. Will you work that many hours? I have no idea. Or that it's perhaps you that many days. Perhaps you will. I hope you will. It doesn't matter, because this is a calculation for the purposes of setting a fee. And how do you do that? So, all right, fee calculation. What are your costs? I'm going to go over to the example on the right-hand side. At a certain point, you need to put in what you'd like to get paid. How do you come up with this amount? I don't know. Whatever amount you feel is appropriate. Now, your accountant might say, here's an amount that you should get paid. And usually that amount is fairly low because you're going to pay taxes on that. Don't put that number in here, because that might be, for me, for a long time before inflation and everything like that, it was $54,000. That doesn't work out very well for my hourly, my median rate. And honestly, this is going to be the elephant in the room with regards to this calculation. Whatever number you throw in here is going to affect the bottom line, which is the hourly rate. So for the purposes of argument, we're going to put in 150,000. Everybody should probably like to get paid 150,000. Maybe that's a dream scenario. There's nothing wrong with a dream scenario. Hypothetically, this is just a number to kind of give you a sense for where you ought to be. Now, for the purposes of argument, I threw in the $30,000 for annual overhead costs. There's a lot of things that go into that, and I showed them to you in this other slide, in this other tab over here, annual overhead costs. This is a number that seems to ring true for us in our world. It might be a little bit less, it might be a little bit higher. 150 plus 30 is 180. See, here's my little calculation on the right side. You can see how that works. So remember, we had 165 billable days. So if you take 180,000 divided by 165, you come up with your base daily rate. That's $1,091 per day. Now, we give a buffer, kind of a little bit of a flex time. There's some people might call it profit. I say it's kind of like, you might mess up with things in the future. So you might, when you're figuring things out, so you give yourself a 10% buffer, because honestly, there's probably something in there that needs some room. Over here, the calculations all can be changed. Your overhead could be 15,000, and that will update. Over here, I'm just going to keep it as 30,000. You might want a bigger buffer. You might need 15%. So that'll change everything. Anyway, we're going to keep it where it was. So what this means is your buffer at 10%. Now you're at $109 is your buffer plus 1,091. That puts you at $1,200 per day. That sounds like a crazy number. It's not, because it gives you an hourly rate of $150 an hour. You're going to see how that makes sense in just a minute. Again, I'm in the example side over here, which you can edit. For your purposes, I kept it blank over here, so you can do whatever you want when you copy this and put it into your own files. You want to put 150 here and your overhead. I'm just playing around here, 20,000, and you give yourself a 10% buffer. Your desired pre-salary tax before tax is let's say 125. Your hourly rate now is 133. So that's the big number. You can round it to 130 if you want. However you want to do it. I got it set so it rounds. All right. And I don't want to analyze my data. Thanks, AI. That's the calculation worksheet. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. Just as a quick overview, you determine what your overhead expenses are. I estimated mine at 30,000. You figure out the amount of weeks you can work in a year, which relates to the number of days, 165. Then you put in your calculations of billable days, again, 165, overhead 30,000. That comes from the other spreadsheet. Set it up to refer to that. A little bit of a buffer. Throw in 150. All these calculations come up. You can double check my calculations. I've done this a couple of times, so it seems to work. Hourly rate of $150 an hour. Simple. All right, I'm going to go back into the spreadsheet. I'm sorry, into the PowerPoint, and let's talk a little bit about this. All right, that's great. So really, what do I charge? Well, hopefully I gave you enough information. I'm going to give you some more information from the Independent Consulting Topical Interest Group, ICTIGS survey. We've done it a couple of times. It was recently done in 2022, and those data were shared with me, so I'm going to share that. But before I get into this, I'm going to share what people median charge across different situations. I want to say that what I'm going to share with you, you shouldn't just take what I tell you and say, well, this is what everybody's charging. If you do that, we could find ourselves in a price fixing situation. We are not doing a price fixing situation because I've shared with you how to calculate your fees based upon your very specific scenario. So don't take what I say in the next couple slides and say, that's what I'm going to do. Don't do that. All right. Promise me. I think I've had people in sessions raise their right hand and say, I promise I won't do that. So don't do but this gives you perspective for what kind of world you're working in right now. All right. So when we've done the surveys over the years, I did the 2015 survey. If we go way back to the 1992, the median hourly fees were $64 per hour. Then it was at $100. And for some reason, over the 12 years that happened from 2003 to 2015, the median stayed exactly the same. And when the survey was redone again in 2022 by the TIG, it was at 150, which was encouraging. Now, what does that really mean? Let's do some inflation. So if we go back to 1992, this is all 2022 inflation numbers, by the way, not 2025. I bet these numbers are way different if we look at 2025 today. But in 2022, $150 in 2022 dollars is $150. 2015, that was about $125, $164, and $138 if we go back. But anyways, we finally got up to where we should be in 2022. So here's how it looks if you think about the number of years you've been working. Not a surprise that in the first couple of years, people are charging a little bit less. When I first started, I said $60 because, that seemed like a lot. Let me just say, if you do your calculation, you end up at $60 an hour, you need to redo your calculation because that's way too low. You'll see the minimum over here. Sorry, let's do this. You can see the 25th and the 75th percentiles. You likely should be between the 25th and the 75th percentiles, okay? I'm not saying you should be at the 50th. I'm not saying you should be at the 75th or even the max. But you should probably do the calculation and find yourself in this range. At least I can say, and we're going to talk about this in a couple slides, when you talk about this with your clients, if you find yourself in that situation, you can say reliably, hey, I was within the median range of what my peers are saying. And this was based upon 197 people who completed this survey. But you'll see across the board, 150 seems to be that number that we come back to. At least it was in 2022. All right, now we're into the only you section, the Smokey the Bear section, which we also like to refer to as the Becky Garrow section of our presentation, because I'm going to ask questions that people often ask, and then I'm going to turn around and answer them. But you'll also say, kind of depends on who you are, what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how this works within your own scenario. So I do absolutely believe you should avoid this scenario. Client says, how much will the evaluation cost? And you say, well, how much is the value of the project? I want 10%. And then you stop the conversation right there. I generally would say you should be at least prepared to go a lot further with that conversation, because I think that that's kind of a cop out when you say, I always get 10%. Well, what does 10% mean? Because that's what your client ought to be saying. Well, I'd like a little more detail. And I as a client would raise a red flag and say, wait a second, that's not cool. You need to be prepared to talk like the carpenter here. You know where to place the nail. You understand program evaluation. It's going to take some things. So how did I identify the squeak in the stair? What kind of background do I have with working with stairs? Okay, so I'm not going to go too far down that scenario. Think about this with regards to how you are as a program evaluator, right? So we're talking about the value of your services. All right, so here's some questions for you. When do I share how I calculated my fees? And this is my answer. You don't. At least don't offer it immediately, because frankly, you're going to say, I came up with this fee of a certain amount. Now, I know I said don't do 10%, but you have to be able to be prepared to say, okay, it's going to cost you $30,000 for this. Oftentimes people are going to go, okay, that's great. And they understand, but then they'll say, how did you come up with that? Particularly if you're working with like a National Science Foundation project or a different type of a project for the US government, they want to know a little bit more. And so then I share the costs for the project, how I came up with those. So I say, I had these number of hours. It's going to take 125 hours times this amount. I'm not going to be able to do math in my head. It's going to cost you $30,000, right? Maybe I'm not doing good math right now, but anyway, the point is number of hours times your hourly cost. That's your annual rate. Now, let's just say they say, I need to understand a little more. So I did a calculation that considers all my expenses and my time available per year to work on projects. And that's how I calculated that rate of going back to the standard 150. That's how I calculated the $150 per hour rate. And they say, well, how do you know that makes sense? I would say I did a comparison to my peers, and this is a competitive rate. If I said 150, I did my calculations independently, and I would say it's the median rate for what my peers are charging right now. And I do say that. All right, another question. Can I take a look at how you calculated your rate? Nope. Be careful with this. If you go down this path and you want to share, if you let people in on how you calculated rate, you're giving them access to all kinds of questions. And I don't know if you're going to get to the end of these questions. Why do you need insurance? Why are you don't want to go there. You basically say the amount of cost that takes the indirect cost, the overhead rate is 30,000. My costs are this. If you want to go there, I wouldn't go there. I'd be careful. I'd say, I calculated my rate. I'd push back and say, calculated my rate based upon my time available per year and the costs. And I made a quick calculation using those 3 steps I talked about before. All right, next question. What are your indirect costs? So an indirect cost, for those of you who don't know, are costs that may be over and above your rate, okay? You don't have indirect costs in this situation because it's a fully loaded rate. You included your indirect cost in your calculation. Now, there are times where you'll have indirect costs in addition. You generally want to stay away from that. I typically want to go back to what's my hourly rate, what's my daily rate. If we keep it there, it keeps it simple. I don't charge for indirect costs. Um, and then if they say, how did you calculate your indirect costs? I say, okay, red flag, let's be careful. I don't know if I want to go too far into that because honestly, when I've shared, this is my actual scenario. I said our costs are $150 an hour, and they say, well, what's your indirect cost? What's the indirect cost rate? Well, I don't have a negotiated indirect cost rate, so I have it fully loaded. And this was with a university nightmare situation. And then they said, well, how did you calculate your indirect costs? And I said, well, it's based upon these things. And I went into the details that I shared with you. And they said, well, you don't have a negotiated indirect cost rate, so we can't offer that amount, which was more than 10%. And they're like, we'll give you the de minimis of 15%. And 10%, it's 15% now, it just changed. So I ended up getting an hourly rate of like $125 an hour because they weren't going to honor my indirect costs. Be careful walking down this path because you end up getting less than what you expect. I didn't feel like I had an option in this scenario. I had to go with that process, but it's kind of a pain and it wasn't very fair. So I've avoided talking about my indirect costs because of that situation. All right. Should I charge a lower rate for some clients and a higher rate for others? Thank you, Becky Garrow. Only you can decide, Smokey the Bear. I say no. And the reason for this is because my clients are actually fairly similar to one another, and a lot of them know each other. And if I charged $125 over here and $200 over here, I fear the situation where they'll talk, or $30,000 a year over here and $15,000 over here for the exact same type of project. They're going to talk and say, well, why am I paying more? I don't want to get into that situation. Now, what you're going to hear other people talk about if we get into this in the chat, people will say things like, I like to offer a different rate to my nonprofits that are kind of serving the community and or maybe where I want to do some work. And I haven't really had an opportunity to work with them. Where over here, I've got my foundations that have gobs and gobs of cash and they don't care about my costs and they'll pay whatever I ask for. Only you can decide. We try and because we do a lot of government work, I try and be consistent so that I can say the same thing to everybody and I never have to worry about what I've told anybody. It's the same rate. And we charge, even though we have people who are paid more and paid less within our firm, everybody's at 150, at least in the current scenario. We will likely go up across the board in the not too distant future for all those inflation reasons. But anyway, I don't charge a lower rate for some clients and higher rates for others. There's always nuances with some projects, but we won't go into that. How do you determine a starting point for the cost of a project? Now, I want everybody, I know everybody's on mute. I don't want you to unmute, but I want you to say this out loud wherever you are. I want you to ask your client, what is your budget for evaluation? I know this feels like an uncomfortable thing. Some of us feel like we're introverts and we can't ask hard questions, but you do need to be prepared to ask your client or your potential client, what is your budget for evaluation? You'd be surprised how often they'll say, oh, we budgeted 60,000. And you went, I wasn't even thinking 60,000. I can do a lot for 60,000 when you were thinking in your head 30,000 or whatever. Now, if they bluster and they say, well, I don't know, we're shopping it around, we're not really sure what we need, they're playing around, they play a game of they don't want to tell you, right? That's fine. That happens a lot. And there's nothing really wrong with that. They want to be careful not to share their cards, show too much. So this is what I do. I think about what I know about that project and I discuss what are the basic fees to do the basic minimum. And then I take that and I kind of guess high. So if I think this is going to be a basic project and the basic minimum might be like 25,000, or actually I would think maybe I'd like to get 20,000 out of this. I would not go any lower than 25,000 because I don't know anything yet. I have no idea. And I'd say, well, I'm guessing this is going to take about 25,000. And then I would talk about different aspects of the cost structure. I would say things like, okay, so that's just to kind of get the basics done, right? And that's based upon X number of hours at X rate, right? I would know this ahead of time. But then there are different things that could affect that cost. Do you want me to travel? How frequently are we going to talk and communicate? Is it going to be weekly? Is it going to be monthly? Is it going to be quarterly? Because that's really where most of your time ends up, is talking to people about what you're doing and not actually doing the work. There's a lot of things that are involved with like survey design, data collection, data cleaning, reporting, table development. Are you going to do anything with regards to interactive data dashboards? Are you going to do extra reporting? Or do you have different kinds of reports for different types of audiences? Are you going to travel? And trust me, travel costs a lot, because it's not only the cost of a flight and your your night stay at the Hilton. It's also the amount of time it takes for you to be there, which is time you can't spend with other clients. So what I usually do is I offer a variety of options. If they say, well, why don't you give us a proposal? I'll give them the 20, in this scenario, a $25,000 a year approach, and I'll say how that's calculated and what's included with that. But then that would be kind of like the Nissan Versa, which is kind of one of the cheapest cars you can buy today, and then up to the Cadillac version, right, the most expensive version. And the Cadillac would get you more travel, more communication, all the other things that they think they'd like, that you suss out during the conversation with them. Or similar but slightly different is the cafeteria plan, where they can choose the things that they think they need. You have the basic minimum, and then, oh, I'd like some focus groups over here. I'll add that to my platter as I'm walking through the cafeteria, and I'll take an additional report to my board, and travel once every other year versus every year or every 6 months. And so they can add those things, and oftentimes we'll actually kind of check it. We'll put it as a check marks, and they can add it up, and they say, oh, it'll be $72,000 a year, or whatever the number is. All right, next question. What's the least I should accept for an evaluation? Only you will know the answer to this, and it will be highly contextual. So internally, when somebody has an annual project that's going to take a certain amount of that we're going to take for a year, there's a couple projects that we would say are smaller for various reasons, but for the most part, we have a basic minimum, and I typically say it's going to cost about $18,000 as a minimum. That's what we say for some of our NSF projects. They'll say, if the client comes back and says, well, I only have $12,000 or $10,000, we hold firm, and we don't bend on that. And the reason for that is we know it's going to take us a certain number of hours, and we know what our costs are per hour based upon that calculation. And if we bend on that, then we're going to end up in a situation where we're not getting paid enough. And trust me, I feel it now. It was easier when I was a one-person operation, and $15,000 felt like an amazing amount of money. But when you're running an operation with 18 people, it's a little bit more complicated. So we have to take basic minimums. You're going to figure that out. In the early days, you're probably going to take a smaller amount. But if somebody says, I only have $10,000 for the project, I don't have the red flag to put up here on this slide. But that's a red flag to me, that this is going to be a complicated client who probably doesn't really value evaluation to begin with. So we're going to have to do a lot of work to kind of bring them up to speed on why we're doing evaluation, the value of it, how it can benefit them in the long run. All right. So you may be asking this next question, and certainly you'd be prepared your client to say, well, how do you know all this? And the answer is, I am a professional nerd. Okay. I carefully track my hours. I know what it takes to do a project like this because I've been around, I've done this, talked about it. It's not my first rodeo. But yes, I am a professional nerd. We all track our time. In fact, I'm late for any of the Goshen folks who are on the line today. I'm late in getting your hours back to you because we report back to everyone their quarterly hours and how much time they spent on certain projects and what our revenue was and how that was relative to what we think we should be charging. All right, so I'm going to finish with my 5.5 rate ideas. You should know your rate for the purposes of scoping, which was the conversation we were just having about how to do this sort of work. You should calculate it on a regular basis, not just one time. Consider your value in relation to your client's program. Don't just say the 10%. You could start there, but you better know what goes into that 10%, right? use the resources. I say Excel, but it's actually now a Google Sheet. It's from a previous slide. It's okay to reference the TIG surveys that I shared with you, but make sure you don't use those rates without calculating your costs. You should understand it all in relation. And so this is me. And with that, I'm going to stop recording. Say goodbye to everybody in the YouTube world. Hopefully this was interesting and informative for you. And everybody else who's here, stick around. We got about, I guess, 17 more minutes to talk about it.